Tonight we're in Dumfries, the Queen of the South, on the banks of the River Nith. The biggest town in the south of Scotland has had its fair share of ups and downs over the years. So what matters most to the people who live here? Let's find out. Welcome to Debate Night. Debate Night is the only show in Scotland where you get to ask the questions, answering them on our panel this evening. From the Scottish Conservatives, the MSP for Dumfriesshire, Oliver Mundell, a former spokesperson for Education and Skills. Oliver supported new leader Russell Findlay in the leadership contest. From Reform UK Scotland party spokesperson and former candidate Helen McDade in the recent general election. Reform UK got almost 170,000 votes in Scotland, which was 7% share. That's almost double that of the Scottish Greens. From the SNP, the former MP for Ochil in South Perthshire, John Nicholson. John is ruled out standing in the Holyrood elections unless something radically different happens. Could that be tonight? From Scottish Labour, the MSP for South Scotland, Colin Smith, a former modern studies teacher. Colin is the party's older persons champion and a former spokesperson for energy, transport and rural affairs. And finally, the leader of the Scottish Liberal Democrats, Alex Cole-Hamilton. Alex is the MSP for Edinburgh Western and party health spokesperson. He says he's open to working with other parties following the next Holyrood election. Please welcome them all to Debate Night. And of course, welcome to our studio audience here in Dumfries, my hometown. It's great to be back here, and you can join in the discussion from home, wherever you happen to be in Scotland tonight. BBCDN is the hashtag you need right now on social media, and our Debate Night podcast will be available for you to download straight after the show. So let's get started. Our first question of the night in Dumfries comes from Alistair Kelly. Alistair, evening.
Is the NHS broken? And if it is, who broke it?
Thanks, Alistair. Labour's Health Secretary Wes Streeting says the NHS is broken but not beaten, and we will turn it around. Colin Smith.
I think he's correct. I think our NHS is broken despite the amazing efforts of our hard-working staff that simply don't get the support they need. My inbox at the moment, I have to say, more than half of the casework is healthcare issues and social care issues. You cannot register with an NHS dentist anywhere in Dumfries and Galloway. At the moment, there are currently about 100 people in the local hospital in beds that shouldn't be there and don't need to be there, but they don't have social care packages to go home to because we don't have enough carers. 1 in 6 Scots at the moment are on a waiting list. We have the highest waiting list we've ever seen in our National Health Service. So it is absolutely broken. I think it has been neglected by the Scottish Government over the past 17 years. They haven't reformed our NHS.
Wes Streeting says all roads lead back to Westminster on this.
There's no question that the funding issues are very much an issue that Westminster needs to provide.
So it's Labour's responsibility this time?
Well, Labour, not the Labour government's responsibility. We've been in power for 3 months. It's very difficult to change things within that 3-month period, but we've made an early priority, and we'll see progress, hopefully, in the budget on this to tackle those tax loopholes and provide extra funding for the National Health Service. But it'll be ultimately up to the Scottish Government to make sure they focus that money on our NHS, and they've failed to make the changes, and they've also wasted money quite significantly. We heard this week that the reforms on the National Care Service, they've spent £30 million on that already. Imagine if we'd used that money to give care workers a pay rise, we could have seen some of those vacancies for carers being filled. That would have got some people out of hospital, and we could have seen some of those waiting lists being tackled. So there's been bad decisions made by the SNP government in Scotland, and frankly, I don't think anyone could say after 17 years of this SNP government, our NHS is stronger than it was when you took
John
over.
Nicholson, Neil Gray, Health Secretary in Scotland, has said the NHS is not in crisis in Scotland. Is he right or is he wrong?
Well, I think, first of all, saying the NHS is broken, I think that's just crass. And I think it's very unhelpful. And I think if you're an NHS worker, you're not going to welcome that kind of description. Of course, the Labour Party has been in government in Wales for about 100 years. And the outcomes in Wales are considerably worse than Scotland. Everybody knows what the challenges are. The challenges are that we're living much longer than we used to, and that's absolutely great. We've got a declining population, and that's not so good. Brexit's been disastrous for the care sector because a lot of people who worked as carers have gone home, and that's caused a crisis. And we all know that, and Labour is scared to talk about Brexit because they know that English voters approve of it, Scottish voters don't. I've had recent experience of the NHS. I've had 2 hip surgeries, which are transformational. And I've had care sector experience because my mum, who died at the start of the COVID outbreak, lived at home until she was 95. She got 4 daily visits from care workers paid for by a combination of the local authority and the NHS. It allowed her to stay at home. And my friends in England can't believe that such a level of care is available in Scotland.
How long did you have to wait for your hip replacement, John?
Well, I think I probably waited on and off about a year, I would say. Okay. But the thing about hip surgeries, people talk about, I got to discover quite a lot about it. I discovered, for example, that hips sometimes squeak when they're replaced, which is a bit disturbing. Fortunately, mine isn't squeaking. But I discovered that there's not a waiting list in the way you would think of a waiting list to get into, I don't know, into a train or on a restaurant or whatever. Part of it depends on just how bad your hip is. So I got the first one done. I don't know why you're shaking your head, because you weren't in my position.
My first hip
was literally crumbling.
For over a year, John.
So I had to get it done quicker because it was on the point of collapse. My second hip, I waited longer because it wasn't quite so urgent.
We're glad you're fixed, but
Thank you.
I know we've got NHS professionals in the audience and, most importantly, patients as well. Lady in the back there first. On you go.
I was going to say, the issue with the NHS is, are we not just constantly throwing money at the NHS when really we need to be looking at putting the funding into other areas and actually combining health and social care again?
Thank you. We'll come on to that. We'll come on to that. So the fault lines, John says the NHS is not broken. Colin says it is. Man in the blue sweater here.
This time last year, I was in hospital with cancer. I was diagnosed on a Thursday afternoon. I got told I had lymphoma. On the Monday morning, I started chemotherapy. 4 days later, I can't do anything but praise the NHS locally and up at the Beats in Glasgow. The service I got and the treatment I got, I would say everybody went over and above what you would expect of them. And to say, I hear people saying, our NHS is broken. It's not broken everywhere. And I don't think we're as bad as what it is in other parts of the UK.
How are you now? Good.
Yep.
Good. Lady just behind you, what do you think?
Yeah, so I'm interested in the comments about how Labour have come into government and are going to be looking at the budgets going forward. Working within the NHS, it is extremely difficult, and you're talking about waiting lists. We need to fix social care to allow us to free up the space within the hospitals. So my question would be, what funding and resources are we putting in place into social care to allow us to take the acute hospital back, to allow the waiting list to run before we get into winter?
OK, Colin, I'll come back to you on that in just a second, but Oliver Mundell, is social care the key to fixing the NHS?
I think social care is at the heart of the problem in terms of bed blocking, if you want to call it that. But it's not people blocking beds; it's they've got nowhere else to go. And I think there's so many people I know in the hospital here in Dumfries who are going, as the gentleman says, above and beyond, who deliver a really good quality of care. And I think whatever's going on with the structure of the NHS and some of these external challenges, we shouldn't forget that.
Is it broken, the NHS? That's the question.
I think it's broken in places. There are times when people are not getting the treatment they deserve, but still, I think we're very fortunate in Scotland, in the UK, to have an NHS there that actually, if you're in dire straits, if you're in these emergency situations, the quality of care is still there. You have people who caring about you, who go above and beyond, who work longer than their hours, who do amazing things for patients. And I think we shouldn't forget that and allow that to get lost in the kind of political language and debate around the NHS. That doesn't mean we should accept things as they are. We have to be willing to have tough conversations about how to reform the NHS and get it working for staff and patients.
Well, let's have that conversation tonight. Lady in the purple cardigan there. Yes.
I've moved up here recently in the last 2.5 years. I lived down in the Midlands. When an ambulance was called, it would take 7 to 8 hours to get to you. I was poorly here Christmas before last. It was there within 20 minutes, and I was in A&E within 20 minutes. I mean, I'm flabbergasted. I've had different things happen to me in the Midlands, and I've had to wait 3 hours just for triage, and then they sent me home and I got infected, so I had lots of problems. But here, I can't fault the NHS. They're wonderful.
So when you hear this talk of the NHS being broken, how do you feel?
I agree with the aftercare for the elderly, because I live in a complex where there is a lot of elderly people. But the lady that lives by me, she has 4 people come out to her every day, and they're wonderful. And I think the more people, because I used to work for Age UK when I was down south, and I was going to carry on, but I decided to retire because I was worn out, basically, from working from the age of 15. So I think that's what needs to be broadened. You need to empty the beds in the hospitals, and then it's like a vicious circle. You've got to be able to give the stability to the people in their homes, because they'll recover better in their homes.
Absolutely.
And the A&E point is very important, and the ambulance point is very important, because all the National Health Services of these islands have problems, but we're doing better in A&E, and the ambulance point particularly strikes. I don't think that. The ambulance point. I just finished. The ambulance point particularly strikes home with me, because I was in hospital recently with sepsis, and my partner called an ambulance. It was in Spain. The ambulance were there within minutes. I got whisked into intensive care. It was a close shave, the doctors told me afterwards. Had I been down in London, I might have been sitting in an ambulance outside the hospital waiting for admission, and frankly, I would not have made it if that had been the case.
Ambulances are one way of measuring it, but there are other measures as well.
You're kind of skipping over some of the realities, and I think it's denying things that staff experience every day.
I'm just picking up on what the lady said.
And also patients, because here in Dumfries, in the run-up to last Christmas, there were 1,000 people treated on hospital beds in A&E because the hospital was full. Staff busted a gut to make sure that those people still got the treatment and were triaged, and were properly cared for.
And that was a similar picture in NHS borders as well.
It did, and it has a huge impact on those patients who are getting a substandard service, and it has a huge impact on the staff who have to go in again the next day and do that again.
The question tonight, though, is the NHS broken? Alex Cole-Hamilton.
Well, Stephen, there will be NHS staff and patients in this audience and watching tonight at home who will have their heads held in their hands in despair, because they're sick of the blame game. They're sick of politicians like us trying to find the word to just best describe what kind of crisis it is. They're sick of the comparison, the unfair comparison between health boards in Scotland and health boards in England. They just want it fixed. Because if it's not broken, it's only being held together by sticking plasters, baling twine, and the love of the people that work in it, the people that go to work every day for the patient care, the experience of the lives that they help. It's them that we thank, and they are working miracles on their knees. They're weaving gold out of straw. So when you got your cancer care, I'm sure that the nurses on that ward can't remember the last time that their shift was safely staffed, despite this Parliament having passed a bill ensuring that they would have a full complement of staff. You can legislate for it, but you can't magic up the nurses. Secondly, if your daughter fell off her bike and broke her leg, she'd be in hospital by the end of the day. But if she comes to you with self-harming behaviour, suspected ADHD, anything like that, she joins the longest queue in the National Health Service. We talk about dental deserts. We've just seen 2,000 people deregistered from a Dumfries dentist. We've got Ukrainian refugees flying back to Kiev for dental care because they're willing to brave the the drone attacks because they cannot find dental care on the NHS. A lot of it does come down to social care, because without that, you've got more than 2,000 people reach record levels this week in Scotland of people unable to go home because they're well enough to do so, but too frail to do so without a care package. We need to stop making this about words, about who's to blame, and actually listen to the people at the heart of this, because they're part of the solution.
Thank you, thank you. Lady on the end, there, yes.
The SNP should actually have more funding, I think, from Westminster for the NHS Scotland. I have moved from Glasgow to Gretna. I've tried to get a dentist. I was told today I would have to go back to Glasgow to get a dentist. You can't get a dentist in Gretna or in this area at all. It is broken. I believe at the moment, people waiting for hip operations, they have to wait between 5 and 7 years for hip operations. Why don't they invest more money into the NHS? We're waiting for money for Westminster. Why don't they invest more money?
Let's just pick up on the subject of dentistry, because this is a hot story down here this week. 2,000 patients have been told they're now being deregistered from a dentist in Dumfries. There's now 36,000 people in this area with no NHS dentist, and there's currently no dentists in the region accepting new registrations. Some of you in this room, I know, will be affected by this tonight. Helen McDade, what do we do about the NHS?
Well, we could do a lot of things, and it's interesting what's been said here, because I think there is a couple of issues. Acute care was mentioned, emergency care, and I think a lot of people would say the same as was said in the audience about getting great care when you're really there on the line. Another thing that I think has come out of this is perhaps rural areas, and I live in a rural area as well, are better off than some of the people who are having the experiences in cities. And let's not forget that the SNP were in charge of building 2 hospitals which couldn't be opened for about a year because of what was wrong with them. And we're looking at an inquiry 10 years on into the Queen Elizabeth Hospital in Glasgow. It was on the telly last night. 10 years on, we're looking to learn the lessons. So we do need to look at our model of care. NHS doesn't work in all ways, and something it particularly doesn't work for, I have found in my own personal experience, is for chronically ill people. And we have more and more chronically ill people, including post-COVID. So we do need to do something drastic about this. And with regards to the dentists and indeed doctors, we need to train more. I mean, nobody's mentioned that, but actually part of the problem is we're not putting them through because it's expensive to train them. Well, we need them, so let's train them. I mean, dentists are paid a lot of money. We could easily get people who would want to do it, who are not being taken in. The Reform Party believe that we should look at the model of care. It's not about privatising it. It's about saying if you cannot get the care you should get in the time given, then you will be able to take your voucher and get private care for it. And we could, in that way, help alleviate it. And coming back to a point that was made earlier about, you know, the fact that people were going back to Europe. People went back to Europe because COVID existed as well. You know, people went back to their homes because they were frightened, and the COVID has obviously had a major effect. But the current model, we need to cut down on the management, we need to get more frontline care.
Brexit's been an issue in this as well, but you accept that, don't you?
It's an issue at the same time as COVID was. COVID was 3 months.
They couldn't afford the visas. That's one of the
problems.
No,
well, the ones I knew...
You have to earn a certain
you've said
level
quite a
of
lot,
salary.
Mr Nicholson.
You have to earn a certain level of salary.
Wait a second, I cheer this, you don't. I'll stop him when he's made his point. On you go.
You have to earn a certain salary to qualify for a visa, and quite a number of people didn't earn that salary,
right.
which is why they went back home.
Hang on.
All right, OK, the people I knew went back because the jobs went, because COVID came along, a lot of them were in hospitality, they shut the places, they were living in those places, and also they had families back home that they were worried about. Of course, these issues have come together, and we haven't had proper Brexit delivered. So yes, there are issues there, but nobody can suggest that the world is the same now, post-COVID, with the lockdowns. The first lockdown, maybe fair enough. The lockdown...
There's a lady in the front row here shaking... Hang on a second, shaking your head.
Sorry, you're saying that Brexit and people going home because of COVID, people couldn't come back because of the rules that they had to earn X amount before they could come back. Now, care staff are in minimum wage, but that wasn't why I held my hand up. My dentist, I have now had 4 separate dentists go private. So I have moved from one dentist, never even got an examination, gone private. You're saying about 2,000, that's 2,000 recently, and you're saying about 36,000. But that, again, impacts in the NHS, because oral hygiene, if you look at any of the information available, it impacts general health. And that is going to make even more people unwell that will land them in hospital.
Well, 1.8 million Scots have not seen a dentist in 3 years. What are you going to do moving forward?
Well, it's shocking, because I don't know. I'm actually at a stage that I'm saving up, because I was a total tomboy child, had an accident, had major work done. So every time I go to a dentist, it's actually quite a lot of work. And I've been in tears on the phone. I mean, over the last 4 or 5 years, I've been crying my eyes out, because to me, dental work is so important because of what happened to me. And I cannot get a dentist, and I can't afford to go private.
Colin Smith?
Well, Helen says the problems in rural areas are not as bad as the cities. I think this lady has highlighted the fact they absolutely are. We have a real crisis here in Dumfries and Galloway over dentistry. Over 30,000 people, like the lady here, have been deregistered by dentists from the NHS across the region. You cannot register with an NHS dentist anywhere in the region at the moment. This is an absolute crisis. The SNP government have said they've got a new contract for dentists. That's going to solve the problem. Well, frankly, dentists are voting with their feet, and they're deregistering people, and they're leaving NHS care for adults in this region. So it is simply not working. We need to look again at how we fund dentistry in this area. I think we have to look at, for example, directly employing dentists within the NHS to try to tackle some of these issues. That does mean training more, absolutely, of course it does. Because this is a crisis that's not going to end overnight, but it's absolutely impacting on people in this audience. I don't have an NHS dentist in Dumfries at the moment, and I'm sure very few people in the audience have that.
There's a lot more we need to get through this evening. Your views on that and everything else you hear on the programme, the hashtag is BBCDN. Tonight we're in Dumfries. Next week we're going to be in Perth. The week after that, Kirkcaldy. So if you'd like to come along and be part of the audience for either of those shows, just go to the website bbc.co.uk/debate night. Let's go to our second question of the night, which comes from Senga Beresford. Senga, good evening.
Hi. Tens of thousands are arriving in Britain illegally each year, costing millions of pounds on hotels alone. How are we going to change things?
Thank you. This is a bit of a live issue here in Dumfries, where asylum seekers are being housed in a hotel in the town. There's been leafleting by protesters about that, also pro-migrant demonstrations in Dumfries. I think the figure was 8 million a day last year, which has come down to 4.2 million a day this year on this. Senga, what do you think? How do you feel about it?
Well, these are strangers to us, right? We know nothing about them. We're allowing them to come into our country, mix about us, and we know nothing about them. So I think it needs to stop. We need to stop them coming in. It's mostly men, right? Where's the women and children if they're coming from war countries?
John Nicholson.
I could not disagree more. I'm absolutely sick to the back teeth with people demonising folk who come to our shores, who claim asylum in our shores. We're seeing the monstrous attacks that are taking place in the Middle East at the moment. People flee. Nobody comes here because they've got better options back home. They come here to seek sanctuary, and it should be our honour and privilege to accept them. Now, you throw around the word illegal. The vast majority of people who come to this country who claim asylum get asylum because they've got valid reasons to come here. And you hear from Labour politicians and Tory politicians that there are safe routes. There aren't often safe routes. Take Afghanistan, for example. In Afghanistan, if you're hiding from the Taliban, if you're a woman who wants an education, if you're a young gay person and you're liable to be killed by the Taliban, if you try and come here, there is no route to come here. Until recently, the Home Office was advising people to go to the embassy in Kabul to apply for a visa. An embassy that is closed.
Okay, all
so
right.
we should welcome these people and they enrich our society.
Let's get back to Singer's question. Helen McDade, what do we do about this?
Well, we could do a number of things, and it's Reform's policy that if you come in as an illegal immigrant and you're coming from Glasgow, you're coming from France.
They're always welcome here.
Yeah, someone's already said she came. They're coming from France. France is not an unsafe country. There is no reason for them to be seeking asylum from France, and they're paying a lot of money to get here. And as has been mentioned, they're mostly men. So actually, there's no reason for them to be coming in by that route. Yes, we can take asylum seekers, and we always have done, but there are safe routes for them to come. And if they're coming from France on these boats, they are coming illegally. If we say, yes, you can come in, and we put them in these hotels in Dumfries or wherever, and we keep them for some years, and then, as has been said, many of them will get asylum. Most of them have thrown away their papers on the way here. Why do they do that? If they're coming from Kabul or whatever.
How do you know they've done that?
Because people have found their papers, the lifeboats and so on. That's, we all know that.
They didn't hide them very well then.
Well,
Oliver Mundell.
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily share the language around it, but I do think the level of immigration into the UK has been too high. And I think there are too many people in politics who are not willing to listen to the public about it. I know there are mixed views, but I think there are a lot of people out there, who share the view that immigration is too high, and it's having an impact on local services. It's having an impact on local people, and I don't think it's good for asylum seekers and immigrants themselves. They've often been exploited by criminal gangs. They've been put up in hotels without the proper support, and at a huge cost to the taxpayer. And I think we need to get a grip on the issue and get something done about it.
What do you mean, get a grip on the issue?
Well, I think we have to tackle the issue in part at source. I think there have been good examples, like the deal with Albania, to return people back home, that's been very successful.
The Rwanda scheme?
I support the Rwanda scheme, and I think it's something, and I think that's the problem. There are far too many people in politics, who are happy to just let this issue sit to one side. And I think unless you've got a better suggestion, then people should be willing to give that a try. And there were signs, certainly, that it appeared to be having some deterrent effect. And I think it's a shame, after the talk we had from the Labour Party during the general election, that when it comes to governing, it's now an issue that they're not interested.
All right, let's hear from the audience on this. Lady in the front row here, yes.
Thank you. This is just to talk about your comment about refugees and why they're not coming to France. There's actually a reason why they're not coming to France, which was explored in a recent documentary. In these large refugee compounds that we see across the coast, people are getting attacked by locals, their houses set on fire, their tents set on fire. Access to water is being blocked. People are trying to murder these people in refugee camps. It's not safe in France. There's a reason why refugees are coming here, and while, yes, they should go through the proper channels to come here, there's a reason why many refugees do not stay in France, and that's because they fear from their lives, from the people who attack them.
Thank you. Lady with the glasses on the end, over here.
Read something somewhere that the difference between us and them is pure luck, where we're born. Yeah. If there was a civil war between Scotland and England, God forbid, we would be rushing, going, oh my God, take us in, please, please, we're British, we have a British passport. What's the difference with their passport? Why are they not welcome here?
Thank you. And lady on the front here. Yeah.
Yeah, so I must be seeing something very different to all these men coming to just take advantage, but I see people coming from war-torn countries who are terrified, but also people who come and want to work really hard. We've just talked about an NHS which is broken and a social care system that's falling apart, and we rely so heavily on people coming from other countries to come and work, look after our frail older people, and there are people who'd be desperate to do this work, and we could employ them, and we wouldn't be talking about a broken NHS and a failing social care system. So I think we should be welcoming it.
Alex Cole-Hamilton, you took in a Ukrainian refugee, didn't you?
We did. I mean, it felt like the least we could do, given what the fighting men and women in Ukraine were up against. But, Stephen, I listened to the question with an element of depression, really, because I hate how the tone of this has sunk to this conflation of the idea of immigration and refugees. Refugee is a word that was coined in London during the Huguenot crisis, when we took in French victims of persecution into a place in London called the Refuge. That's where the word comes from. We have a proud history in these islands for taking in the storm-tossed, the dispossessed, facing some of the worst persecution imaginable, whether that's Biafra, the Kinder transport, latterly in Ukraine. But these people, when we have welcomed them into our shores, repay that welcome tenfold. That's why the Lib Dems want to allow, firstly, safe routes for asylum seekers to get here, because nobody should have to choose between what they're facing at home and a leaky boat to get here. We need to give them, if they have a right to be here, then they should have a safe route to get here. Secondly, give them the chance to work. At the moment, the Home Office does not allow people who are actively having their asylum seeking claim checked. They're not allowed to work. If we give them that ability, they will repay that generosity tenfold. We'll start filling a lot of the vacancies we need to fill. We will see the warmth of and the compassion revisited back on us. But my goodness, just hearing, I was depressed at the start of this question, but listening to the comments from the audience, I am heartened. This is the country I recognise, so thank you.
Helen, I'll come to you in a second. Young lady in the back row, yes.
I want to know why that we were so willing to let the people from Ukraine come in, but when it comes to these people from Afghanistan, Kurdistan, and from the Middle East, we dehumanize them and just are dirt to them, basically. Why are we treating these people the way they are? Do you think it's due to racism?
Yes. Okay, hold that thought for a second. Lady in the front row probably going to say the same thing, I think, yes.
Almost. I was going to just address, Helen had asked, why are they coming here instead of staying in France? Britain built itself as this colonial powerhouse and advertised to the whole world, we are a place to be and we are going to make your life wonderful. We went into other countries and we dominated.
We've caused a lot of the problems.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And just for the second part, if many of you have just suggested that you wouldn't prefer they are not here, they go elsewhere, what provisions are you going to put in place to support people that are displaced through war or through climate catastrophe? Because we have got a very important position in the global landscape and we need to be able to support. Otherwise, what are we doing? We're just letting people die.
Helen McDade.
Yeah. You raise a very important point about that we had colonies and that why are we not doing more with them. And I think it's very interesting, the attitude that we take to some of these countries. So we do want people to come in. We want people to come in and help our economy. And we can have a system for that. We can have a system of assessing them and letting them come in. So I'm talking now about legal immigration. And I was very fascinated that when the Lib Dems were in power with the Tories down south, they changed the rules on how people came into this country. And I knew a Filipino family. They lived in Pitlochry, where I lived. He had been there years, working and working to get his wife and daughter across. They came, the girl was in school for about 5 years here, and that government came in, they changed the rules. That woman and her 2 children then had to go back to the Philippines and stayed there for at least another 5 years before he could get a job that came within the regulations, before he could get through yet more things and get his family back together. And then the girl couldn't get to Scottish University because she hadn't been in school the uniform number of years. So you agree we should relax the rules on immigration? No, I'm saying nobody raised a word about that. And there are plenty of countries that we had a lot in common with that we are not taking those people in. So it's not open borders. And I would also say to Alex, if they're coming from war-torn countries in these dinghies, where are their women and children? They're back there.
There are women and children. I mean, there is a myth behind all of this.
No, 90%
and actually, listen, no, Helen, I mean, you asked me a question. So I worked, before politics, I was a youth worker, and I worked with unaccompanied asylum-seeking children, many of whom had been trafficked to this country or had escaped their trafficking handlers. A lot came from Afghanistan, a lot came from Vietnam. They were being held in slave-like conditions, sometimes in cannabis horticultural conditions, but there were also just kids whose parents had been just annihilated in front of them, who had found passage here, who were looking for a way to make a life for themselves on these islands. And the final thing I'll say is this, is that the Home Office, the UK Borders Agency, had such a hostile environment policy to them, they had to go find their way from Glasgow to Croydon to then prove that they were underage, that they were under 18, which you can usually only do through bone density scanning. They only had 3 weeks to prepare their case. They had no access to legal representation. They could get that extended if they could exhibit evidence of rape and torture. So stop with this myths about it's just the men, where are the women and children. I have worked with those children.
Nobody's talking about the children, because they're not the ones on the boats either.
Colin Smith?
Well, we started tonight's programme debating our National Health Service and whether it was broken or not. I think it would have been an awful lot more broken if it wasn't for the fact that people came to our country, immigrants came to our country and worked in our National Health Service. You're more likely to be treated by an immigrant in a local hospital than an immigrant is going to take that bed in the local hospital, and we shouldn't forget that.
Well,
I'm proud of that fact. I'm proud of that fact that Dumfries has welcomed so many people from Ukraine. Not men, women and children fleeing from tyranny after Putin's invasion. And we have welcomed those people to our community. And I'm proud of the warm welcome that we've given those people. Now, there's no doubt we do need to tackle some of the challenges around those gangs who are causing misery for immigrants by trying to push them onto small dinghies and send them across our seas. And Helen says that it's all men. She obviously hasn't seen the footage of those young babies lying on the beach who have died because of the trauma they've been put through by these gangs. And we've seen early action from the UK government. I can't believe Mundell thinks the Rwanda scheme was a success. Hundreds of millions of pounds, and the only people, how many people, let me tell you, Oliver, exactly what Labour are doing. We've scrapped that scheme. The only people that went in flights to Rwanda were Home Office officials to hand over hundreds of millions of pounds of taxpayers' money. We're using that money to invest in over 100 enforcement. We're putting over 100 enforcement officers in place to try to clamp down on some of those gangs that are bringing people across it. And Oliver talks about people being in hotels. Colin. The reason why they're in hotels is because the mess this Tory government left in the immigration system means that people are waiting months and years to have their applications assessed. They're having years.
There are thousands of people in this country desperate for a home already.
And you know what, Oliver, if your government hadn't left the immigration system in such a mess where hundreds of millions of pounds are being spent on housing people because your government failed to actually assess the applications of those people that are in hospital.
All right. Okay. Enough. Your views on all of that. The hashtag is BBCDN on social media. Time for a third question of the night. It comes this evening from Sean Moffat. Sean, good evening.
After axing the winter fuel allowance for pensioners, why is it always the poorest in society who need to deal with the tough decisions consecutive governments take?
Oh, Sean, thank you. 32,000 older people in Dumfries and Galloway will lose their winter fuel allowance. Colin Smith, you're the older people's champion. How does that title work with taking money away from older people?
Well, the reality is it's not a policy that I would have chosen to implement. It's not one that I have a huge amount of support for.
Did you know it was coming?
Well, it was a UK government decision initially, and obviously the decision in Scotland is a matter for the Scottish Government. So when the Scottish Government took the decision not to continue that fuel payment in Scotland, I didn't know it was coming until Scottish Government ministers actually announced that decision. And look, I understand that some people will argue, and understandably so, that if you're a millionaire, why should you get a winter fuel payment? I appreciate that particular argument. I also understand the argument that the government have inherited a £22 billion black hole that we're going to have to try and fix, and there'll be more difficult decisions in the forthcoming budget.
You have to choose.
You have to make choices, and the reality is that there'll be a lot more choices that will have to be made in order to fill that £22 billion black hole. Oliver, let me...
Oliver, hang on. We'll come to you in a second, Oliver. Finish making your point. I'll come to you next.
We have inherited this £22 billion black hole because the Conservative government made promises on spending that, frankly, they didn't put the money in place to do that. Now, I would have personally liked to have seen a different approach to the winter fuel payment. I think what we could have done and should have done is looked at the tax system that clawed that money back from the richest pensioners, because my difficulty with the winter fuel payment decision is that it is probably right that people on very high incomes don't receive that. And you hear people saying, well, I spent it on holidays or whatever. But my concern is that the threshold is very, very low.
All right, OK, so Oliver Mundell.
People on pension credit will continue to get that.
OK, you made your point, Colin. Oliver Mundell.
No, I just find that very difficult to listen to, because in 14 years of difficult choices, that wasn't a difficult choice that the Conservatives ever made. And when Labour were in opposition, they used to say that this would lead to the death of thousands of people, and now they're happy to go along with it. And I think politics is about choices, and we're seeing very early on from this new Labour government exactly the type of choices they're willing to take. And I think for people living here in a rural constituency, we're going to see another bad choice coming up. And Colin, used to put out press releases saying that the Conservatives going to be putting up fuel duty. But now I think we are going to see a Labour government, a budget, look at measures like that, that are going to really put pressure on local families. It's not right.
All right, OK.
And they've got the balance wrong.
Man in the leather jacket there.
Mr Smith speaks of a 22 billion black hole. Can you tell me exactly what that £22 billion black hole is, as Rachel Reeves won't tell us?
Well, it's very straightforward. The UK government have made commitments that are £22 billion more than the money that's actually in the budget in order to fund that, and that is just within this financial year. So that's, I mean, it's not just the Labour government's talking about it, it's all independent studies that have shown that. I don't think anybody's actually disputing that we have a £22 billion black hole to fill. It's how we do that, and it'll be incredibly challenging to do that, and we'll see some action in the budget to hopefully tackle that and make sure that it does fall on those with the broadest shoulders, those that can afford to pay a bit more in some of the tax loopholes, for example, that we could close to bring in income in order to tackle that. But it's absolutely not in doubt that there is a £22 billion black hole.
OK. Lady in the back row with the glasses. Yes.
True that MPs are entitled to claim unlimited expenses for their second homes with regard to heating.
No. OK. John Nicholson, you can knock that on the head for us.
No, it's not true.
OK, well, that's easily answered. Man in the back row there, yes.
Yes, I find that the person that's taken away the winter fuel payment for the last 5 years has claimed £3,700 a year for her heating her second home. Now, with her job as Chancellor, with her joint husband, when you're getting benefits, it's always joint husband and wife. So we take her and her partner's income is £250,000 a year. And she's taking away the winter fuel payments. I think it's a bit hypocritical of her.
Alex Cole-Hamilton, after axing the winter fuel allowance, why is it always the poorest in society who have to deal with the tough decisions?
Well, it shouldn't be. And they didn't have to do this. And actually, the Liberal Democrats in the election earmarked a number of areas we could bring in revenue to the Exchequer, which wouldn't fall at the feet of the most vulnerable in our society.
So they're making the wrong choices.
They're making the wrong choices. And I'll tell you where they should have gone first, is the bank taxes. Rishi Sunak, years ago, handed down a massive tax break to the big banks, the profits made by big banks, which has never been reversed. And for some reason, I keep wanting to wake up from this. I can't understand that a Labour government wouldn't go after the rich bankers before the poor pensioners. It's absolute lunacy.
Helen McDade?
Yeah, the Reform MPs voted against this measure. We think it's disastrous, really. And the answer that people can claim pension credit, we know a lot of old people either will be too proud to do it or won't be able to answer the 140 questions or however many there are. It's a lot. So, and they can't even go online, a lot of them. So a lot of people will just be sitting cold. And let's face it, we're all sitting in the cold because the energy costs are huge. And energy costs are just going to keep going up. And one reason they're going to keep going up is because all these other parties all believe that more and more renewables, which you're getting in your area, there's a lot of wind and so on.
I think that's not true. The Scottish Conservatives have been a very strong voice for oil and gas in the Scottish Parliament.
Well, not when they were in the UK government, they weren't. So our energy costs are going to continue to go up until we reverse this, until we stop this net zero nonsense. But meanwhile, it's a nonsense to stop our
I think that's a bit of a leap. But, Stephen, I think the fundamentals here...
Sorry, I was talking, actually.
Well, I thought you finished your point. Finish your point. Go on, you go.
Yeah, so my point is that we have to take action on both accounts. We need to reverse this decision immediately, but also that's not going to be enough because it's not going to counter the energy costs, and we've got to realise that net zero is not saving the world. In fact, we've just exported a steel plant to produce steel over there, and you know, it wasn't a cause for celebration that we shut down.
Okay, let's try and stick with this question, which is around winter heating. Just briefly, Alex. Yep.
So the fundamentals here are that net zero isn't some ridiculous crusade. It would mean the installation of every home in Scotland, which would actually bring down heating bills.
Oh, we've been talking about that for decades.
But it's vital.
That's what people
need
say,
to do it. We need to do it. And you can't just abandon it. Helen, I'm speaking now. So remember that back in the day, this was caused by pensioners. We'll all remember those winters where we would have a body count, a literal body count of the pensioners that had died because they were too anxious to switch their heaters on. This was back in the day when they could put 50p in the meter for a day's electricity or even less. And that was when the cold weather payments came in. Then the winter fuel supplement replaced that. Now, by removing it at a stroke, I fear it very much, but we are going to see that body count this winter again.
Okay, John,
and in Scotland, where the weather is colder, we're going to see...
John Nicholson, do you agree with Alex on this?
Yes, I do. But, Stephen, do you remember a debate night that you had in the run-up to the election? And I remember Anna Sarwar, the leader of the Labour Party in Scotland, turning dramatically and saying, "Read my lips, no austerity under an incoming Labour government." Remember his exact words, his sincere promise. And the first thing the Labour Party does in government is clobber the pensioners. They didn't go, as the gentleman there said, for the non-doms and all the tax avoiders. They went for the poor pensioners. Now, of course, pensioners are scared to claim benefits. That's why Labour's alternative is so dishonest. My dad used to run a big social security office, and he used to say, social security scroungers aren't the problem. It's all the people who won't claim because they're too scared to claim. Labour MPs south of the border down in Westminster are deeply ashamed of this. And of course, the hypocrisy that the leader of the Labour Party is claiming tens of thousands of pounds for clothes and posh glasses when he's clobbering pensioners is absolutely nauseating.
Man in the blue sweater. Yeah.
The benefits cap is higher in London. If you get benefits, you're allowed to receive more. Wages at a lot of places in London are paid at a higher rate, so that's regionalised. The north of Scotland, during the winter, is a lot colder than the south of England. So why was there no allowance made for the elderly and the infirm in the north of Scotland, where there's more need to have their heating, using gas and electricity?
And why didn't Scottish Labour MPs defend Scottish pensioners instead of voting for this? Or I think one of them did the very brave thing and abstained. I mean, they were chicken. They're scared of their leader. They're scared of losing the whip. And they're as docile and passive as we knew they would be.
OK, just a final word on this to you, Colin Smith. I mean, this is the third week we've discussed this in debate night, and it remains as hot a topic as ever for the
Absolutely,
audience.
and I understand the concerns people have. I think one of the things to point out is that the winter fuel payment is actually now devolved to the Scottish Government. We have the opportunity, frankly, to do something different with those particular powers, and I would like to see... Well, it is true, John. You say it's not true. It's actually now devolved.
It all depends on Westminster money. So the Scottish Government is bound by Westminster decisions.
Well, they have a £59 billion spending budget. They can make choices in order to do that. And the reality is we haven't actually had a UK government budget yet, John, and we'll see what's in that budget. You talk about austerity. The budget hasn't even happened yet. Austerity is when the budget's cut. We haven't seen the changes in any budgets until we actually see that UK government budget. But we have an opportunity, I think, to do something different in Scotland. We have to look at what we can do with the powers we have. And I think to change that, I think there's an opportunity to look at the winter fuel payment in Scotland. Can we bring more people in with the resources we have? Because it's absolutely a real topical subject, and I understand people's concerns on it.
Another hot topic down here is our fourth question of the night. The hashtag is BBCDN for you to debate along with us. And our last question tonight comes from Liz Hitchman. Liz, good evening.
Good evening. Do you want Galloway to become the new national park, yes or no?
Thank you. Now, Liz, you're one of the people campaigning against this down here. People who are watching this, both of you, in fact, in the front row here, people watching this in other parts of Scotland might think you've hit the jackpot with this down here, but you don't want it. Why not?
Hundreds of reasons why. I mean, infrastructure, for one, is not here. There's not enough infrastructure here. The amount of tourists, they say that a national park helps the ecosystem, helps nature, but I mean, mass tourism does neither of those things. The ecosystem is very fragile, so people tramping over. You've got areas where they'll build big car parks where there's a beauty spot or something like that. There's endless reasons.
OK, well, you've made it a really clear question for us. Galloway, new national park, yes or no? Oliver Mundell?
No, I'm strongly opposed to the proposal. I don't think it serves local people. I think it's urban do-gooders imposing their sanitised version of the countryside on Dumfries and Galloway. I think our countryside is beautiful as it is, and I think there are other measures that should be taken first to support existing tourism businesses, to support our farmers, our foresters, to make sure that they're creating jobs. And I think the other big problem with what's been proposed is it doesn't come with significant new money. It's a classic SNP promise, where the big idea gets announced in Holyrood, everyone claps along and says, isn't this great? And the reality's far from that. You know, and all we're going to get paid for is a few signs and a few more people working for Nature Scot, you know, who know less about our landscape, about our culture, and about our people than the people who are already here.
Yeah, I think there's a big meeting down here tomorrow with Nature Scot to discuss exactly this. Gentleman in the blue shirt on the front row here. Yeah.
I think there's a lot of farmers down here are finding it challenging just now in the environment that we have to work in. Putting more bureaucracy of having to farm within a national park, I think is extremely unfair on those individuals. Absolutely. And secondly, if you look at the small towns like Rockcliffe and Kipford, for instance, my wife and I walked from Rockcliffe to Kipford over the weekend. The number of holiday homes and Airbnbs, empty houses. You go down there in winter, there's nobody, they're ghost towns. How does a local pub survive in the off-season? How does a local shop survive in the off-season? How does a child that grows up in that area who wants to live in that area afford a home when it's bought from somebody in London or Edinburgh or Glasgow and turns it into a holiday home, pays over the odds? How do they afford to live in these places? Turn it into a national park, you then restrict house building and development. How do they afford to stay in those areas? National parks, bad idea. If you look at the Lake District in peak time, it's a nightmare. That's what happened in Galloway if it was to happen here.
Okay, Colin Smith, new national park for Dumfries and Galloway, yes or no?
Well, it's interesting because the recent report this week from Scottish Environment Link actually showed that in the national parks we have, there's been an increase in house building in those particular areas. But look, I'm very clear that if we're going to have a national park in Galloway, it needs to be made by the people of Galloway, for the people of Galloway. That's what the aim of the Scottish Government's consultation needs to be. We've got a blank sheet of paper here. We do not have to have the same national park in Dumfries and Galloway as happens in other areas. We have to have a park that actually meets the needs of the local community. And if the final proposals from the Scottish Government don't meet the needs of the local community, then it's not something that I would support. But I do think it's a bit over the top to talk about the fact it's going to be a bit like the Lake District. There are 12 million people visit the Lake District every year. The feasibility study in a national park in Galloway estimated that it could potentially increase tourism by between 250,000 and 500,000 visitors a year, bringing about 30 to 60 million pounds into the local economy. And I think it has been disappointing in the debate so far that we have seen people try to demonise the tourism sector. There are 7,000 people in this region employed in tourism. That brings in 350 million to the local economy. And I have to say at the moment, a lot of our hotels are still struggling at the moment. A lot of our local pubs are struggling. And we should welcome visitor numbers.
Or no, or is this
well,
maybe?
I think maybe. Because we do not have a proposal on the table. I think that's important. People are making assumptions about something that doesn't yet exist and is not being proposed. Okay. We don't know the boundary. We don't know what the powers would be. There's an opportunity to shape that. And my view is people should take part in the consultation, try to shape the proposals. And if we don't like the proposals, then frankly, I won't support those proposals.
3-month consultation on this with the Scottish Government. Man in the back row first. Yes, on you go.
The creation of the national park in itself is not a problem. The problem is that we're about to create another level of the bureaucracy, largely from unelected individuals who will decide the planning issues and possibly what colour your front door is going to be.
But we don't know that will be the model.
Okay, hang on a second.
We don't know that will be the model.
Helen McDade, you were previously head of policy for the John Muir Trust, weren't you? So you've worked in this space. New national park for Dumfries and Galloway, good idea, yes or no?
I wouldn't have picked this one, actually. So I do come from a different perspective. I do think national parks can bring a lot of good things, and I think you can get over-concerned about looking at others. The English ones are run on a different model, and also planning. I very much doubt there'll be planning involved in this one. The Cairngorm National Park only is involved in very specific planning that affects it. So it's not the same as Loch Lomond, and you're going to have this consultation. So I don't think the government picked the one I would have picked. I think they avoided picking one in John Swinney's patch and then one in Kate Forbes' patch, which were perhaps maybe certainly the more consulted on. I know there was a lot of consultation in the one for the Tay Forest National Park, and actually the consultation came out broadly positive for it. But people do need to get their concerns in. I don't think that planning will affect the farming. So I think people can certainly change what's going to happen there. And I know that there was a group fighting for a national park in Dumfries and Galloway for years. So there are people in this area, but it's up to yourselves.
Yeah, OK. I'll come back to you in a second. Alex Cole-Hamilton, new national park for Dumfries and Galloway, yes or no? Where do the LibDem sit on this?
The specific wording of the question matters here. It's like, would I, Alex Cole-Hamilton, introduce a national park in Dumfries and Galloway? And it's not up to me. I'm not from here. It should be in your hands. There's this decision.
So what, do we have a referendum?
Well, no. Yeah, if needs be. I mean, I think, you know, participative democracy, like referenda, is no bad thing. But what's clearly absent here is any kind of discussion with people that live here, that love here, and have to live with it. I mean, far too many decisions are made by politicians and bureaucrats in Edinburgh who don't know what it's like to live here, who've never even visited here in some cases. But it's a good soundbite, it's a great line in a manifesto, and so they go with it. And one thing I will agree with, what Helen said, is that all too many politicians in power right now are quite happy for things to happen to other communities rather than their own, because they've listened to their own residents and they understand that actually it's not always the idea they think it is.
Okay, John Nicholson, I'll come to you in a second. But you like a referendum. Should there be one on a national park for Dumfries and Galloway?
I'm not crazy about referenda, actually, although it's been established as a principle in the independence on the independence question. I had to smile when Oliver mentioned crazy proposals that are unfunded. It was, of course, his former Prime Minister who wanted to build a bridge from the southwest to Northern Ireland, threw away millions in a consultation. Of course, as everybody knew, it was all hot air. But imagine what the traffic would have been like to get to and from that bridge with the lorries.
National park,
but
yes
back
or
to
no?
the lorries.
We're already on the road.
I don't know.
We're already on the road.
I don't know is the answer to that question. I've heard some of the arguments. I would want to listen to more of the arguments. Clearly, Galloway's got a problem, hasn't it, with depopulation and ageing population. We need more people to come and live in beautiful Galloway. So I recognise that there needs to be investment there. I rather like national parks, what they bring to the communities. I'm very much in favour of rewilding in Scotland to increase the amount of wilding. But I recognise that there is clearly a problem with holiday homes and how inaccessible homes are to members of the local community. But often, from what I know, other national parks have brought in significant investment. And I agree, I don't think it's a fair comparison to compare it with the Lake District, because the Lake District is so well established.
Okay, final word on this.
I don't think that's a precedent.
Final word.
I was just going to say, I'm concerned that Nature Scot won't commit to asking a yes-no question to whether or not people want the proposal. They just say, what would you like it to be like? But they don't ask the fundamental question at the start, do local people want this? And I think that's a really clear commitment to give. And when I asked the First Minister, John Swinney, in the Parliament about this, if local people say no to this, will it not go ahead? And I got 3 minutes of an answer that was a bit like Colin's and a bit like John's. It didn't come to a yes or a no. And I think local people do deserve the final say.
Okay, well,
that's how democracy should work.
Nature Scot are here tomorrow to discuss this more, and then the consultation, and I'm sure it's a story we'll continue to follow. That's it for tonight, though. We are out of time. Next week, we're going to be in Perth. Have a look at our website if you want to come along and join us there, or in Kirkcaldy. If you missed any of tonight's show, we're repeated a bit later on BBC One Scotland. You can catch us at any time on the BBC iPlayer that suits you. Thank you very much to my panel here in Dumfries, and to our lovely audience here this evening as well, and to you at home for watching wherever you are. See you next week. In the meantime, stay safe, stay well. From all of us in Debate Night, good night. Thank you very much.